Welcome to Eldritch Events channel. On this channel, we'll be exploring the mysterious and unexplained, delving into topics like the paranormal, bizarre, horror, and creepy things, and possibly uncover the secrets that have fascinated people for generations. Every week, we will be uploading fresh stories on our channel to keep you engaged and eager for more. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's explore the world of the paranormal together. Our initial story is centered around a guard who encountered strange events while working at a detention facility, one of which resulted in the discovery of evidence left behind by a deceased prisoner. The following story features Officer Stephen, who was posted at a watchtower and had an encounter with vengeful spirits, leading to his disappearance without a trace. And with that, let's begin. It was a typical night at the San Bernardino County Central Detention Center, but something happened that would change the way Officer Gomez looked at the world forever. As Gomez made his way down the officer's walkway towards the rear of C-Tank, he saw an inmate worker at the far end. Officer Gomez thought nothing of it, assuming the inmate was there to perform his duties. But as he looked back into the housing area, he realized that he didn't have an inmate scheduled for cleaning. Something was off. Officer Gomez quickly turned back toward the inmate worker, but he was gone. Gomez scanned the area, but there was no sign of him. As he stood there, he felt a chill run down his spine. The temperature around him had dropped rapidly, and it felt as if he had just walked into a freezer. Gomez took a few steps forward, and the extreme cold dissipated just as quickly as it had appeared. Gomez was shaken by the experience, but he knew he had to report it to his partner in the control room. As Officer Gomez shared his story with her, she nodded her head in understanding. She had seen similar things before and knew that jails and prisons were notorious for ghost sightings. The other deputies on the shift didn't believe him, and they laughed at his story. But Gomez knew what he had seen, and it was something that he would never forget. Over the next few weeks, Officer Gomez continued to work the graveyard shift at the detention center, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There were strange noises coming from the cells, and he would catch glimpses of shadowy figures darting around the corners of his vision. One night, as Officer Gomez was making his rounds, he heard a voice whisper his name. Gomez turned around, but there was no one there. He called out to his partner in the control room, but she didn't hear anything. Gomez felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized that he was alone in the dark with whatever was haunting the detention center. As the weeks turned into months, the ghostly presence at the detention center only grew stronger. Inmates would report seeing apparitions in their cells, and some claimed to have been visited by deceased loved ones. Gomez began to research the history of the detention center and discovered that it had been built on the site of an old cemetery. The bodies had been moved, but the emotional charge of the burial ground remained, attracting the spirits of the dead. One night, a few weeks after his initial encounter, Officer Gomez was doing his rounds in the B tank when he heard a strange noise coming from one of the cells. It sounded like someone was banging on the metal door. Gomez approached cautiously, but as he got closer, the banging stopped. He peered through the small window in the door, but he couldn't see anything. The cell was completely empty. Suddenly, he felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if someone was watching him. Gomez turned around quickly, but there was nobody there. He felt a sense of unease and decided to head back to the control room. As he walked back, Officer Gomez couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him. He kept looking over his shoulder, but there was nothing there. When he reached the control room, his partner noticed that he looked pale and asked him if he was okay. Gomez decided to act as if nothing had occurred and suggested that they continue with their work. Over the next few weeks, the strange occurrences continued. Doors would open and close by themselves. Strange noises would come from empty cells, and cold spots would appear out of nowhere. He tried to ignore it and focus on his work, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Then one night, something truly terrifying happened. Officer Gomez was doing his rounds in the A tank when he heard a blood-curdling scream. It was coming from one of the cells. He ran towards the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached the cell, Gomez could hear someone whispering incoherently. He hesitated for a moment before opening the door. When Gomez did, he was met with an icy blast of air. The temperature in the cell had dropped so much that he could see his breath. As Officer Gomez looked around, he saw a figure huddled in the corner, its back turned towards him. He approached slowly, trying to get a better look. As he got closer, the figure turned around. It was an inmate who had died in his cell the week before. His eyes were completely white, and his skin was a sickly gray color. Officer Gomez screamed and stumbled backward, slamming the door shut behind him. Officer Gomez ran back to the control room and told his partner what had happened. They immediately called for backup. When the other deputies arrived, they went back to the cell, but there was nobody there. The temperature had returned to normal, and the room was completely empty. After conducting a thorough search of the cell, the officers found nothing unusual. As they were about to leave, they noticed a partial handprint on the small window, which sent shivers down their spines. They exchanged looks, realizing that this was definitely something eerie. Later, they took the prints and ran them through the database, only to discover that they belonged to the previously deceased inmate that Officer Gomez had seen earlier. When the superiors learned of this, they instructed the officers to keep it out of the official report and to refrain from discussing it further, deeming it an anomaly. From that night on, Officer Gomez was never the same. He quit his job at the San Bernardino County Central Detention Center and never looked back. He still thinks about that experience often, and it still sends chills down his spine. Gomez may never know what really happened that night, but one thing is for sure, there are some things in this world that he was not meant to understand. Officer Stephen had heard stories of Spandau prison's haunting history since he first arrived in Berlin. However, it wasn't until he was selected to participate in the military ceremony with the Russian Honor Guard that he had to confront the horrors of the prison firsthand. After their successful performance, Officer Stephen and his fellow soldiers were assigned to guard duty at the prison. Tower 9 was the most dreaded tower of them all, and for good reason. The French soldier who had hung himself there years ago seemed to have left a lasting imprint on the tower. On the night Officer Stephen was assigned to Tower 9, he had just settled into his post when he heard the door at the base of the tower open. He was surprised since it wasn't the end of his shift and only the sergeant of the guard had the key. Then he felt the temperature drop as if a ghostly presence had entered the tower. The sound of heavy, labored breathing filled the air, and footsteps echoed up the stairs. Officer Stephen called out, demanding the intruder identify themselves, but there was no response. The footsteps grew louder until they were right below his feet, and something pushed up against the trap door he was standing on. The trap door continued to bump up and down while someone mumbled incoherently below. Officer Stephen was paralyzed with fear, unsure of what was happening. The noises eventually stopped, and Officer Stephen told his fellow guards nothing had happened on his watch when they asked the next day. Despite his efforts to brush it off, Officer Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next few nights were uneventful, but on the fourth night of his shift, things took a turn for the worse. As he settled into his post, Officer Stephen noticed a strange chill in the air. It was colder than usual, and he could see his breath misting in front of him. He tried to shake it off and focus on his duties, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Then, he heard the door creak open again. This time, he was sure it wasn't the sergeant of the guard. He reached for his gun, but his hand froze in midair as he saw a figure materialize out of the darkness. It was a man, but his features were twisted and contorted as if in agony. Officer Stephen tried to shout for help, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure continued to advance, his labored breathing filling the air once more. Officer Stephen could hear his heart pounding in his chest as the figure drew closer and closer. Suddenly, the trapdoor beneath his feet began to rattle again. The figure vanished into thin air, and Officer Stephen was left alone with his terror once more. He knew he couldn't keep this a secret any longer, so he told his fellow guards everything that had happened. To his surprise, they didn't seem shocked. They exchanged knowing glances and told him that many others had experienced similar encounters in Tower 9. They explained that the French soldier who had hung himself there had left a curse on the tower, and that his tormented spirit still haunted the place to this day. Officer Stephen's blood ran cold as he listened to the guard's story. He couldn't believe he had been stationed in a place with such a horrific history. He tried to convince himself that it was all just superstition, but the events of the past few nights had left him shaken to his core. As the night wore on, Officer Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He kept seeing movement out of the corner of his eye, but every time he turned to look, there was nothing there. He tried to stay alert and focused, but the oppressive atmosphere of Tower 9 made it almost impossible. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from below, and the trap door flew open. Officer Stephen jumped back in terror, his heart racing as he watched a figure slowly climb the stairs. It was the French soldier, his twisted features illuminated by the flickering light of Officer Stephen's flashlight. Officer Stephen's training kicked in, and he raised his gun, shouting for the soldier to stop. But the soldier continued to advance, his labored breathing growing louder and louder. Officer Stephen fired a warning shot, but the soldier didn't even flinch. As the soldier drew closer, Officer Stephen could see the pain and anguish etched on his face. He was trapped in a perpetual state of torment, unable to find peace. Officer Stephen realized with horror that he was dealing with a malevolent spirit, one that couldn't be stopped by conventional means. With a sinking feeling, Officer Stephen knew that he was doomed. The French soldier had claimed yet another victim, and Officer Stephen's soul would be trapped in Tower 9 for eternity, just like the soldiers. As the morning sun rose above the horizon, the guards arrived at Tower 9 to relieve Officer Stephen. Nevertheless, upon opening the trapdoor, they found an empty room and no sign of Officer Stephen. The only remnants of his presence were a single bullet shell casing on the floor, which suggested a violent conflict, and a journal containing thorough documentation of his experiences. Officer Stephen remained missing and was never seen or found since. Thanks for watching our video. We hope you enjoyed it and that it left you feeling scared, intrigued, or just plain entertained. We're always eager to hear from our viewers, so if you have any comments, questions, or ideas for future content, drop them in the comments section below. And if you have your own personal stories that you'd like to share, feel free to email us. Be sure to take a look at our other videos on the screen and remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to ensure you don't miss any of our future content. If you know anyone who enjoys horror, paranormal, or scary stories, please share our channel with them. We truly appreciate it. Thank you once again for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video.